I never thought building a snowman's cousin would lead to the destruction of my neighborhood's entire power structure. But here we are. It started on a Wednesday morning in January when I woke up to find my front yard in Aurora, Colorado, buried under 3 feet of perfect packing snow. The kind of snow that practically begs you to do something with it. I'm Lucas Zimmerman, and I've lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision for about 2 years now. Most days were pretty quiet, aside from the occasional run-in with our homeowners association president, Patricia Henderson, who had made it her life's mission to enforce every single rule in our covenant with the enthusiasm of a medieval inquisitor. That morning, I was supposed to be working from home, reviewing contracts for my job as a legal consultant. Instead, I found myself staring out my window at all that pristine snow and thinking about how much fun I used to have as a kid during winter breaks. My girlfriend had just broken up with me the week before, saying I was too boring and never did anything spontaneous. Those words were still echoing in my head when I made what Patricia would later call the worst decision in Meadowbrook Heights history. I decided to build an igloo. Not a little dome you crouch inside, but a proper igloo, big enough to stand up in, with an entrance tunnel and everything. I had watched enough survival documentaries to have a basic idea of how it worked, and I figured it would be a fun weekend project. Maybe take some photos, post them online, show everyone that Lucas Zimmerman could be spontaneous when he wanted to be. I spent the entire day outside, cutting blocks of snow with a plastic storage bin, stacking them in a spiral pattern just like the videos I pulled up on my phone. My neighbors, the Carlsons, came out around noon and thought it was hilarious. Mr. Carlson even helped me for a couple hours, showing me a better technique he had learned during a trip to Alaska. By sunset, I had a solid foundation and about half the walls completed. My hands were frozen, my back ached, but I felt more alive than I had in months. The next day was Thursday, and I called in sick to finish my project. I know, not my most responsible moment, but something about building this igloo felt important in a way I couldn't quite explain. By 4 in the afternoon, I was placing the final keystone block in the dome, and I stepped back to admire my work. It was beautiful, about 8 feet in diameter and tall enough that I could stand up inside with only a few inches of clearance. I had even carved out a little bench inside and smoothed the walls until they gleamed like ice. I took about 50 photos from every angle, posted a few to social media with captions about embracing winter, and then went inside to thaw out. That's when I noticed the missed calls. 7 of them, all from a number I recognized as the HOA office. There were also 3 text messages from Patricia Henderson herself. The first text read, "Mr. Zimmerman, I have received several complaints about an unauthorized structure on your property. Please call me immediately." The second, "This is urgent. The structure must be removed." The third, "You are in violation of Section 4.7 of the HOA covenant. Removal must occur within 24 hours or fines will be assessed." I stood in my kitchen, still in my wet snow pants, and laughed. She had to be joking. An igloo was a violation. It was made of snow. It would melt in a week or 2 anyway. I decided to ignore the messages and make myself some hot chocolate instead. That was a mistake. Friday morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my front door hard enough to rattle the hinges. I stumbled downstairs in my pajamas and opened it to find Patricia Henderson standing on my porch with her phone held up, taking a photo of me. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says the word Karen. Blonde highlights in hair cut in that specific angled bob, designer workout clothes despite clearly never working out, and an expression that suggested she had just bitten into a lemon while simultaneously smelling something awful. "Mr. Zimmerman, Do you know what time it is? She demanded. I glanced at my watch. 7:15. Exactly. 7:15 on a Friday morning, and I have been dealing with your illegal structure since yesterday afternoon. I have had 12 complaints from your neighbors about this eyesore. I rubbed my eyes. Patricia, it's an igloo made of snow. It'll be gone in 2 weeks when the weather warms up. It is an unauthorized structure on property governed by the Meadowbrook Heights HOA covenant, which you signed when you purchased your home. Section 4.7 clearly states that no structures may be erected on any property without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You did not submit any such request. Because it's snow, I said slowly, as if explaining to a child. Temporary snow. Not a shed, not a garage, not even a fence. It's frozen water that I stacked up in my own yard. Her face was turning an interesting shade of red. The covenant makes no distinction regarding the materials used in unauthorized structures. A structure is a structure. You have until 5 p.m. today to remove it, or you will be fined $250 per day until compliance is achieved. You're insane, I said, and immediately regretted it because her expression went from angry to absolutely furious. I am the president of this HOA, duly elected by the residents of this community, and I enforce the rules that keep our property values high and our neighborhood beautiful. Your little winter project is neither beautiful nor compliant. 5 p.m., Mr. Zimmerman. Not a minute later. She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Mercedes SUV, which she had parked directly in front of my driveway, blocking me in. She moved it only after taking 3 more photos of my igloo from different angles. I stood there in the cold, watching her drive away, and felt something stubborn settle into my chest. I'm normally a pretty easygoing guy, the kind who avoids conflict and follows rules. But something about Patricia's attitude, the way she had shown up at my house before most people were even awake, the sheer absurdity of calling an igloo an illegal structure, it all just rubbed me the wrong way. I went inside, made coffee, and called my buddy Derek, who worked as a real estate attorney in Denver. Let me get this straight, Derek said after I explained the situation. She's threatening to fine you for building a snowman's house, an igloo, but yeah, basically. And she's citing what? The structural approval clause. That's meant for permanent modifications, Lucas. Decks, sheds, room additions. Nobody in their right mind would interpret that to include temporary snow structures. Well, Patricia seems pretty sure about her interpretation. Derek was quiet for a moment. You know what? I'd love to see her try to enforce this. The HOA covenants are legally binding contracts, sure, but they still have to be reasonable. Fighting you over an igloo that'll melt on its own, that's the definition of unreasonable. If she pushes this, you might actually have grounds for a harassment claim. I don't want to sue anybody, I said. I just want to enjoy my igloo in peace for the week or two before it melts. Then don't remove it. Call her bluff. If she fines you, don't pay. Make her take it to the next level. I'm betting she backs down when she realizes how ridiculous this looks. I wish I could say I agonized over the decision, weighed the pros and cons, considered the potential consequences. But the truth is, I was still annoyed about my ex calling me boring, and Patricia's attitude had activated some deep stubbornness I didn't even know I had. I texted her back. The igloo stays. See you at 5. At exactly 5 p.m., Patricia showed up with 2 other people I recognized from HOA meetings. There was Brenda Morrison, the vice president, a stern woman in her 50s who dressed like she was constantly on her way to a funeral. The other was Gary Chen, the treasurer, who always looked vaguely uncomfortable during these kinds of confrontations. I met them in my front yard, standing right next to my igloo. "Mr. Zimmerman," Patricia began, her voice taking on an official tone, "as you have failed to comply with the removal notice, I am here to formally inform you that as of 5 p.m. today, you are being fined $250 per day. Additionally, the HOA board will be filing a formal complaint seeking injunctive relief to force removal of this structure." "Injunctive relief," I repeated. "You're going to sue me over an igloo. We are going to enforce our covenant," Patricia said. "This is not personal. This is about maintaining the standards that all residents agreed to uphold." Gary cleared his throat. "Patricia, maybe we should consider that the structure is temporary. I mean, it's not like he built a permanent addition." Patricia's head snapped toward him. "The covenant is clear, Gary. We cannot make exceptions simply because someone builds something that will eventually deteriorate. That sets a dangerous precedent." "It's made of snow," Gary said weakly. "I don't care if it's made of cotton candy," Patricia snapped. "Rules are rules." Brenda nodded in agreement. "We have to be consistent. If we allow this, what's next? Someone decides to put up a temporary shed, a temporary RV in their driveway. We open ourselves up to chaos." I crossed my arms. "So you're actually going to waste HOA resources, which come from all our dues by the way, to sue me over snow?" "If that's what it takes," Patricia said. They left, and I went inside feeling like I had just entered into the world's dumbest battle, but I meant what I said. The igloo stayed. Over the weekend, my igloo became a minor celebrity in the neighborhood. Kids asked their parents if they could come see it, and I said sure, why not? I even let a few climb inside and take pictures. The Carlsons brought over their grandkids. My neighbor 2 doors down, an older lady named Mrs. Foster, brought me cookies and told me she thought the whole thing was delightful and that Patricia needed to find a hobby. But there were others who weren't so amused. On Saturday afternoon, a woman I didn't know well stopped her car in front of my house and rolled down her window. "You know you're bringing down all of our property values with that thing," she called out. "It's an igloo," I said. "It's going to melt." "It's an eyesore and you're being selfish. Some of us care about this community." She drove off before I could respond. Sunday evening, someone left a printed copy of the HOA covenant on my doorstep with Section 4.7 highlighted in yellow. A sticky note attached read, "Read it and weep." Monday morning, I got my first official fine notice in the mail. $250 for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. $750 total. The letter informed me that I had 30 days to pay or the amount would be added to my HOA account and could eventually result in a lien on my property. I called Derek again. "They actually did it," I told him. "Good," he said. "Now we have documentation of their unreasonable behavior." "Don't pay it. Let them keep sending notices. I want to see how far Patricia is willing to push this." "What if they actually try to put a lien on my house?" "They can try, but they'll have to justify it in court first. And trust me, no judge is going to uphold a lien over a snow igloo." This is actually getting interesting from a legal perspective. HOA overreach is a real problem, and cases like this can set important precedents. "Derek, I don't want to be a legal precedent. I just wanted to build an igloo." Too late. Patricia made this bigger than that when she decided to die on this hill. Now the question is whether you're willing to stand your ground. I looked out my window at the igloo, still standing perfectly intact in my yard. The weather had been cold enough that it showed no signs of melting yet. "Yeah," I said, "I'm willing." The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening, and I decided to attend. I had only been to one other meeting since moving in, finding them generally boring discussions about landscaping budgets and pool maintenance. This time, The community room at the Meadowbrook Heights clubhouse was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the Igloo incident. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into what she called the enforcement issue. As many of you are aware, we have a situation involving an unauthorized structure at 4782 Maple Ridge Drive. Despite multiple warnings and the assessment of appropriate fines, the homeowner has refused to comply with our covenant requirements. A man I didn't know raised his hand. Patricia, I drove by that house. You're talking about the Igloo, right? I am talking about an unpermitted structure that violates Section 4.7 of our covenant. But it's made of snow, another woman chimed in. My kids think it's wonderful. That's not the point, Patricia said, her voice rising. The point is that we have rules, and those rules must be enforced equally for everyone. If Mr. Zimmerman can ignore the architectural review process, then anyone can. Our entire system breaks down. I raised my hand. Can I say something? Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. Mr. Zimmerman, I wasn't aware you were attending tonight. It's an open meeting for all residents according to the bylaws, I said, standing up. Look, I understand the HOA has rules. I get that covenants exist for a reason. But I think we can all agree there's a difference between someone building a permanent shed without approval and someone building a temporary snow structure that will naturally melt within weeks. I'm not trying to undermine the HOA. I just built an igloo because it snowed and I thought it would be fun. Several people nodded in agreement. A younger couple I had seen around the neighborhood started clapping. Patricia banged her gavel. This is not a debate. The board has made its decision. The structure is in violation and must be removed. We are prepared to take legal action if necessary. Legal action over an igloo, someone called out. That's going to cost the HOA thousands in legal fees. Gary shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the board table. Patricia, maybe we should take a vote on whether to pursue this further. The bylaws do allow for board decisions to be put to a vote when there's significant community interest. There's nothing to vote on, Patricia insisted. The covenant is clear. But the interpretation of that covenant is up to the board, Gary continued, looking nervous but determined. And if the board decides that temporary snow structures don't require architectural review, that's within our authority. Patricia stared at him like he had just committed treason. Gary, we have already issued the fines. If we back down now, we look weak and indecisive. If we keep pushing this, we look ridiculous, Gary shot back, and I was impressed by his backbone. Patricia, I've been doing the books for this HOA for 3 years. We have about $20,000 in our operating account. If we hire a lawyer to fight Lucas over this igloo, that money will disappear fast. For what? To prove a point about snow. The room erupted in conversation, people talking over each other. About half seemed to be on my side, thinking the whole thing was absurd. The other half sided with Patricia, arguing about slippery slopes and the importance of rules. Brenda leaned toward her microphone. Perhaps we should table this discussion for next month's meeting and allow everyone to cool down. No, Patricia said firmly. I'm calling for a vote right now. All board members in favor of continuing enforcement action against Mr. Zimmerman, raise your hand. Patricia raised her hand. So did Brenda. Gary hesitated, then kept his hand down. The other 2 board members, both of whom had been silent throughout the meeting, looked at each other nervously. One older man named Frank raised his hand. The last member, a woman named Susan, kept hers down. 3-2, Patricia announced with satisfaction. The motion passes. The HOA will proceed with seeking legal remedies to force compliance. I left that meeting knowing this was about to get much worse before it got better. The next morning, I received a call from a reporter at the Aurora Sentinel, our local newspaper. Apparently someone from the HOA meeting had tipped them off about the situation. "Mr. Zimmerman, is it true that your homeowners association is threatening to sue you over an igloo?" The reporter asked. Her name was Jennifer, and she sounded both amused and interested. I gave her the whole story. She asked if she could come take photos and interview me properly. I agreed, figuring that if Patricia wanted to make this a big deal, we might as well let the public decide who was being unreasonable. The article ran on Friday, complete with photos of me standing next to my igloo. The headline read, "Aurora HOA declares war on winter fun." It was perfect. Jennifer had interviewed several of my neighbors, including Mrs. Foster, who gave a wonderful quote about how Patricia had too much time on her hands. She had also somehow gotten a comment from Patricia, who had insisted that the HOA was simply enforcing legitimate rules, and that the media was mischaracterizing a straightforward compliance issue. By Saturday, the story had been picked up by a Denver TV station. A news crew showed up at my house that afternoon, and suddenly, I was doing an on-camera interview about my igloo while neighbors gathered to watch. The reporter asked Patricia for a comment too, and she actually gave one, standing in front of the HOA clubhouse and looking very serious as she explained that homeowners associations served an important function in maintaining property values and community standards. The story aired that evening, and apparently it struck a nerve because it went viral. By Sunday, I was getting friend requests from people I had never met, messages of support from across the country, and even a few offers from lawyers who wanted to represent me pro bono. The hashtag IglooGate was trending on Twitter. My phone rang Sunday night with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is Walter Price from Price and Associates. We're a law firm here in Denver that specializes in real estate and HOA disputes. I saw your story on the news, and I'd like to offer my services free of charge. I think you have a very strong case against your HOA for selective enforcement and harassment." "That's generous," I said carefully, "but I'm not really trying to sue anybody. I just want them to leave me alone about the igloo." "I understand, but you need to be prepared. If your HOA follows through on their threat to seek an injunction, you'll need representation. And honestly, I think there's a bigger issue here that needs to be addressed. HOAs have been overstepping their authority for years, and cases like yours shine a light on that problem. I'd be honored to help you fight back." I thought about it. Walter sounded competent and genuinely interested in the case rather than just looking for publicity. "Okay," I finally said. "Let's do it." Monday morning, Walter called me again with interesting news. "Lucas, I did some digging into your HOA's nonprofit status. Did you know that Meadowbrook Heights HOA is registered as a 501c4 social welfare organization?" "I didn't, but I'm guessing that's about to become relevant." "Very relevant. Organizations with that status are supposed to operate exclusively for the promotion of social welfare. They get certain tax benefits and protections, but part of maintaining that status is operating in a reasonable manner that benefits the community as a whole. If they're using HOA funds to pursue frivolous lawsuits against residents, that could be considered contrary to their tax-exempt purpose. So what does that mean? It means we might be able to challenge their nonprofit status entirely. If we can prove they're misusing funds or operating in a way that's harmful rather than beneficial to the community, the IRS could revoke their exemption. That would have significant financial implications for the HOA. I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. That seems like a nuclear option. It is. But Patricia pushed this nuclear when she decided to sue you over snow. I'm going to send the HOA board a letter laying out our concerns and giving them one chance to drop this before we escalate. If they're smart, they'll back down. If not, we're going to hit them with everything we have. Walter's letter arrived at the HOA office on Tuesday. I know because Patricia called me 20 minutes after she got it, and she was absolutely livid. "How dare you threaten the HOA with IRS complaints?" she shouted. "This is extortion." "It's not extortion to point out that you're misusing your nonprofit status," I said calmly. "Walter is just making sure you understand the full implications of your decision to pursue legal action against me. Your lawyer is making wild accusations with no basis in fact. We operate completely within the bounds of our charter and federal regulations. Then you have nothing to worry about. Drop the lawsuit, cancel the fines, and we can all move on with our lives. Never. You violated the covenant and you will face the consequences." She hung up on me. Wednesday afternoon, a process server showed up at my door with a formal complaint. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA was officially suing me in Adams County District Court, seeking an injunction to force me to remove the Igloo, and requesting reimbursement for all HOA legal fees plus the accumulated fines, which were now up to several $1,000s. I called Walter immediately. "Good," he said when I told him. "Let them commit to this in court. Now we file our counterclaim." "What counterclaim?" "For harassment, for violations of Colorado's HOA laws regarding reasonable enforcement, and for abuse of their nonprofit status. We're also going to request that their 501c4 status be reviewed by the IRS. I'll draft everything today and file by Friday." True to his word, Walter filed a comprehensive response to the HOA's lawsuit along with our counterclaim. He also sent a formal complaint to the IRS, questioning whether the Meadowbrook Heights HOA was operating consistent with its tax-exempt purpose. The story hit the news again. This time, the headlines were about the HOA potentially losing its nonprofit status. More reporters called. A producer from a national morning show even reached out, wanting to fly me to New York for an interview. I politely declined, feeling like things were already spiraling further than I had ever intended. My Igloo, meanwhile, was still standing. The weather had remained cold enough that it showed only minimal melting. I had been maintaining it a bit, patching small gaps and keeping the entrance clear. It had become a weird point of pride. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for the following Monday. Walter advised me to attend, so I did, bringing him along as my lawyer. The community room was even more packed than before, with people standing along the walls because all the chairs were taken. Several reporters were present too, cameras ready. Patricia called the meeting to order, looking tired and stressed. "We are here tonight to discuss the ongoing legal situation involving Mr. Zimmerman. The board has reviewed the counterclaim filed by his attorney, and we need to address some concerns that have been raised." Gary spoke up immediately. "Patricia, I've been going through our finances, and we've already spent $8,000 on legal fees for this case. Our attorney is estimating it will cost at least another $20,000 to see this through trial. That's more than half our annual operating budget." Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd. "Rules have a price," Patricia said stiffly. "We cannot allow ourselves to be bullied into abandoning legitimate enforcement actions just because they're expensive." "But it's an Igloo," Susan said quietly. She was one of the board members who had voted against continuing enforcement. "Gary's right. We're spending thousands of dollars to fight over something that's going to melt on its own. This doesn't make financial sense." Frank, who had voted with Patricia before, cleared his throat. "I've also been thinking about what Mr. Zimmerman's lawyer said in his letter about our nonprofit status. If we lose that, the HOA would have to pay taxes on our income. That could be devastating to our budget. We're not going to lose our status, Patricia insisted. That's just a scare tactic. We operate completely within the law. Walter stood up. May I address the board? Patricia looked like she wanted to say no, but with all the reporters present, she nodded curtly. Thank you. I'm Walter Price, representing Mr. Zimmerman. I want to be very clear about something. My client built a temporary snow structure on his own property. It harms no one, violates no reasonable standard, and will naturally disappear within weeks. Your organization has chosen to spend thousands of dollars in HOA member funds to fight this, while threatening escalating fines that now total over $5,000. This is not reasonable enforcement of community standards. This is harassment, plain and simple. He pulled out a folder. I've also been reviewing your HOA's financial records, which are public information for nonprofit organizations. Over the past 3 years, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA has filed 17 enforcement actions against residents. 15 of those were resolved within 30 days. The 2 that weren't. Both involved Mr. Zimmerman's neighbor, Mrs. Foster, who filed formal complaints about President Henderson's aggressive tactics. Those cases cost the HOA over $30,000 combined and were ultimately dismissed. I glanced at Mrs. Foster, who sat in the front row nodding vigorously. Walter continued. This suggests a pattern of the HOA president using organizational resources to pursue personal vendettas rather than legitimate community interests. That is absolutely contrary to the purpose of a social welfare nonprofit. The IRS takes these matters very seriously, as do the courts. The room erupted in conversation. Several people were calling for Patricia's resignation. Others were demanding a vote to drop the lawsuit. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, her face bright red. This meeting is out of order. She shouted, all of you need to calm down and let the board deliberate. The board needs to listen to its members, someone yelled back. Gary stood up. I'm making a motion. I move that the HOA immediately drop all legal action against Lucas Zimmerman, cancel all fines related to the Igloo, and issue a formal apology. Second, Susan said quickly. You can't just make motions without proper procedure, Patricia protested. Actually, under our bylaws, any board member can make a motion at any meeting, Gary said. He had clearly done his homework. And it requires a simple majority to pass. So let's vote. All in favor. Gary, Susan, and Frank raised their hands. Brenda looked at Patricia, then reluctantly raised hers too. 4-1, Gary announced. Motion passes. Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backward. This is ridiculous. You're all making a huge mistake. That covenant exists for a reason, and you're setting a precedent that will destroy this community. The only thing being destroyed is our bank account paying for your crusade, Frank said. Patricia, I've supported you for 2 years as board president, but this has gone too far. Patricia grabbed her belongings and stormed out of the meeting. The room burst into applause. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I just felt exhausted. This whole thing had consumed weeks of my life over something so silly. Brenda took over as acting president for the rest of the meeting and officially motioned to drop all legal actions and fines. It passed unanimously. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and apologize for Patricia's behavior. Mrs. Foster gave me a hug and whispered, "Thank you for standing up to her. She's been terrorizing people in this neighborhood for years." Walter pulled me aside. "Good outcome tonight, but don't celebrate yet. Patricia struck me as someone who doesn't let go easily. I want to keep the IRS complaint active just to make sure the HOA stays in line going forward." He was right to be cautious. 2 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was from Patricia Henderson personally, not the HOA. She was suing me for defamation, claiming that Walter's statements about her using HOA resources for personal vendettas had damaged her reputation. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I called Walter immediately. "She's lost her mind." "No, she's desperate," Walter said. "This is actually good for us, Lucas. She's now acting as an individual, not on behalf of the HOA. That separates her from any protection the HOA's insurance might have provided. And honestly, defamation is incredibly hard to prove, especially when everything we said was true, and said in a public forum about a public figure in her capacity as HOA president. So what do? We file a motion to dismiss based on lack of merit, and we add this to our IRS complaint as further evidence of her misuse of her position. If she was smart, she would disappear quietly right now. Instead, she's digging her hole deeper. The local media loved this new development. The story had now become about an HOA president so obsessed with enforcing rules about an igloo that she was personally suing a resident after her own board overruled her. I did another TV interview, trying to emphasize that I had never wanted any of this drama and just wanted to live in peace. My igloo was finally starting to show serious signs of melting. The temperatures had risen into the 40s during the day, and the structure was sagging noticeably. I took some final photos, knowing it probably only had a few more days before it collapsed completely. March arrived, and with it came the spring thaw. My igloo melted into a pile of slush over the course of a week, and then disappeared entirely into my lawn. The whole thing that had started this mess was gone, but the legal battles continued. Walter filed our motion to dismiss Patricia's defamation lawsuit, and the judge scheduled a hearing for late March. Meanwhile, the IRS sent a formal inquiry letter to the Meadowbrook Heights HOA requesting documentation about their operations and use of funds. Gary, now serving as acting president after Patricia's resignation from the board, called me to give me an update. "Lucas, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA," he said. "This whole situation got completely out of hand. We're cooperating fully with the IRS investigation, and I think you should know what we found when we started really digging into our finances." "What did you find?" "Patricia has been essentially embezzling from the HOA for at least 2 years. Nothing huge, but she was reimbursing herself for expenses that weren't legitimate. Dinners she claimed were board meetings but were actually personal meals. A new laptop she said was for HOA business, but we found at her house being used by her daughter. Probably $20,000 total that we can document," I whistled. $20,000. "Yeah, we've reported it to the police. They're investigating now. Between that and the IRS inquiry, Patricia is in serious trouble." "I never wanted to destroy her life," I said, feeling oddly guilty. "I just wanted her to leave me alone about the igloo." "You didn't destroy her life. She did that herself by being corrupt and vindictive. You just built a snowman's house and refused to be bullied. Everything else is on her." The defamation hearing happened on March 28th. Patricia showed up with a lawyer who clearly wished he was anywhere else. Walter presented our motion to dismiss, arguing that Patricia was a public figure acting in her official capacity, that our statements were made in a public forum regarding matters of public concern, and most importantly, that everything we said was true and backed by documentation. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that the accusations had damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. The judge listened patiently, then asked Patricia directly, "Miss Henderson, did you Or did you not use HOA funds to pursue legal action against Mr. Zimmerman regarding a snow structure on his property? I did, but it was a legitimate enforcement action, Patricia said. And did the HOA board ultimately vote to drop that action and cancel all fines? Yes, but they were wrong to do so. That's irrelevant. The point is that the statements made by Mr. Zimmerman's attorney were factually accurate. You did use HOA funds for this purpose, and the board did overrule you. Additionally, you are being investigated for financial improprieties in your management of HOA funds. Correct. Patricia's face went pale. Those allegations are false. That will be determined by the appropriate authorities. But for the purposes of this defamation claim, I find that the statements you're complaining about were substantially true, made without malice, and concerned matters of legitimate public interest. Your motion is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Zimmerman attorney's fees for having to defend against this frivolous lawsuit. Patricia looked like she might cry. Her lawyer quickly gathered his papers and ushered her out of the courtroom. Walter grinned at me. That's what winning looks like. In April, the IRS completed its review of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. Their findings were damning. The organization had failed to properly document how its funds were being used to promote social welfare. The investigation found evidence of funds being used for purposes that primarily benefited board members, rather than the community as a whole. Combined with the evidence of financial mismanagement and potential embezzlement, the IRS revoked the HOA's 501c4 status, effective immediately. Gary called another emergency meeting to explain what this meant for residents. The HOA would now have to pay taxes on its income, which would increase costs. More significantly, they would need to completely restructure their operations and governance to prevent future abuse. We're essentially starting over, Gary told the assembled residents. We'll be drafting new bylaws with much stronger oversight and transparency requirements. No single board member will have the authority to initiate legal action without full board approval. All financial decisions over $1,000 will require a vote, and we're implementing term limits so nobody can become entrenched in power the way Patricia did. The room was somber but supportive. People recognized that the HOA had failed in its core mission and needed serious reform. As for Patricia, the criminal investigation concluded in May. She was charged with theft and embezzlement for her unauthorized use of HOA funds. The prosecutor offered her a plea deal: plead guilty to misdemeanor theft, pay back everything she had taken plus penalties, perform 200 hours of community service, and accept a year of probation. The alternative was going to trial on felony charges. She took the plea deal. I was in the courtroom when she entered her guilty plea. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. After the judge accepted the plea and outlined the terms of her sentence, Patricia glanced back at me. I expected to see anger or hatred, but instead she just looked tired and defeated. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked me how I felt about the outcome. Honestly, I feel sad, I said. Nobody wins here. Patricia destroyed her own life over an Igloo. The HOA lost its nonprofit status and spent tens of thousands in legal fees. All because nobody was willing to be reasonable about a temporary snow structure. I hope we can all learn something from this about choosing our battles wisely. Summer arrived, and life in Meadowbrook Heights slowly returned to normal. The HOA elected a new board, including several younger residents who were committed to reasonable enforcement of rules. They revised the covenant to explicitly state that temporary, seasonal decorations and structures not requiring permanent modification to property did not need architectural review. My igloo, had I wanted to build another one next winter, would now be completely legal. Mrs. Foster organized a neighborhood barbecue in July, and nearly everyone attended. It felt like the community was healing from the divisions Patricia's crusade had created. People were talking to each other again, kids were playing together, and the atmosphere was genuinely friendly. I was flipping burgers when Gary approached me with a beer. "Lucas, I never got to properly thank you. What you did, standing up to Patricia like that, it exposed problems that had been festering in this HOA for years. Yeah, we lost our nonprofit status and it's going to cost us more in the short term, but we needed that wake-up call. We needed to realize that HOAs are supposed to serve their communities, not lord over them. I just wanted to build an igloo," I said, which had become my standard response to any gratitude. "I know, but you did more than that. You reminded everyone that reasonableness matters, that common sense should prevail over rigid rule enforcement. That's valuable." As the summer progressed, I found myself becoming more involved in the community. I joined the new Architectural Review Committee, where I tried to help strike a balance between maintaining neighborhood standards and allowing people reasonable freedom to personalize their properties. It was satisfying work, helping neighbors navigate the approval process for decks and fences and additions in a way that was collaborative rather than adversarial. In August, I got an unexpected call from a producer at a home improvement show. They wanted to do an episode about HOA disputes and reasonable home modifications, and they wanted to feature my story. They even offered to pay me to build another igloo in the winter for filming purposes. I politely declined. I had moved on from igloo fame. September brought the 1-year anniversary of my breakup, and I realized I hadn't thought about my ex in months. The whole igloo incident, as absurd as it had actually changed my life for the better. I was more engaged with my community, more willing to stand up for what I believed was right, and definitely more interesting than the boring guy she had accused me of being. In October, I ran into Patricia at a grocery store. We both froze, staring at each other across the produce section. I considered just turning around and leaving, but something made me walk over to her. "Hi, Patricia." "Lucas." She looked uncomfortable, her cart filled with generic brands instead of the premium products I remembered her always buying. "How are you doing?" I asked, genuinely curious. She laughed bitterly. "How do you think? I lost my position, my reputation, and I'm working at a call center to pay back what I owe. My husband left me. My friends won't return my calls. I'm basically a pariah." "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. You destroyed my life." "No," I said firmly. "I didn't destroy anything. I built an igloo. You chose to make it a war. You chose to embezzle from the HOA. You chose to sue me personally when you lost. Every step of the way, you had opportunities to back down, to be reasonable, to admit you were wrong. You didn't take any of them." Her eyes filled with tears. "It was just supposed to be about enforcing the rules. That's all I wanted, to keep our neighborhood nice." "Rules are important," I agreed. "But so is common sense and proportionality. You turned enforcement into punishment. You made it personal, and eventually that caught up with you." "I know," she whispered. "I know that now. I've had a lot of time to think about it. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for all of it." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that. I hope things get better for you, Patricia." "I really do." I left her there in the produce section and continued my shopping. I felt lighter somehow, like that brief conversation had closed a chapter I hadn't realized was still open. When winter rolled around again, Colorado got hit with another massive snowstorm right before Christmas. My yard was buried in even more snow than the previous year. Kids in the neighborhood started asking if I was going to build another igloo. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to, just to prove that I could, that the whole battle hadn't scared me away from enjoying winter. But another part of me felt like building another igloo would be dwelling on the past rather than moving forward. In the end, I compromised. I built a regular snowman in my front yard, a classic 3-section design with a carrot nose and coal eyes. Nothing that could possibly be called a structure. Just a cheerful snow sculpture that made kids smile when they walked by. And you know what? That was enough. I had proven my point. I had stood up to unreasonable authority, exposed corruption, and helped reform an organization that needed fixing. The igloo itself had never been the real issue. It was always about the principle of reasonable people being able to live their lives without arbitrary interference. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA, under its new management, operated smoothly and fairly. Property values actually increased once word got out that the neighborhood had reformed its governance. People wanted to live in a community that had learned from its mistakes. I kept in touch with Walter, who had become a friend through all of this. He used our case as an example in seminars. He taught about HOA law and told me that several other Colorado HOAs had reformed their practices after reading about what happened in Meadowbrook Heights. The story had sparked conversations across the state about HOA accountability and the need for reasonable enforcement. In February, the local news did a 1-year anniversary follow-up piece on the Igloo incident. They interviewed me, Gary, and several other residents about how the community had changed. Even Mrs. Foster got her moment on camera, talking about how much better the neighborhood atmosphere was without Patricia's iron-fisted rule. The reporter asked me if I had any regrets about the whole situation. My only regret is that it took something so ridiculous to expose the real problems, I said. An igloo shouldn't have been controversial, but I'm glad that in the end, some good came out of it. Our HOA is better, our community is stronger, and hopefully other neighborhoods learned something from watching our drama unfold. That spring, I finally started dating again. Her name was Wendy, and she worked as a landscape architect. We met at a community planning meeting about updating the neighborhood parks. She thought the whole igloo story was hilarious and told me that, in her professional opinion, temporary snow structures should absolutely be encouraged as they bring communities together and make winter more enjoyable. I liked her immediately. By summer, Wendy and I were serious enough that she was spending most of her time at my house. We talked about her moving in officially, maybe even getting engaged eventually. She got along great with my neighbors and quickly became part of the Meadowbrook Heights community. One evening in July, we were having dinner on my back deck when she asked me a question. "Lucas, if you could go back and not build the igloo, knowing everything that would happen, would you?" I thought about it carefully. The stress, the legal battles, the money spent on lawyers, the division in the neighborhood, Patricia's downfall, all of it. No, I finally said. I wouldn't change it, because as messy as everything got, it needed to happen. Patricia needed to be stopped. The HOA needed to be reformed, and I needed to learn that standing up for yourself, even over something small and silly, matters. Besides, that igloo was really cool while it lasted. Wendy laughed and raised her glass. To igloos, then, and to men brave enough to build them. We clinked glasses as the sun set over Meadowbrook Heights, and I felt profoundly grateful for that random Wednesday morning when I had looked out at the snow and decided to do something spontaneous. That igloo had been a temporary structure, melting away after just a few weeks. But its impact on my life, my community, and even the broader conversation about HOA governance had been permanent. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance create the biggest ripples. Sometimes standing your ground over something that seems trivial reveals truths that everyone needed to see. And sometimes, an igloo is more than just packed snow in a dome shape. Sometimes it is a catalyst for change, a symbol of resistance against unreasonable authority, and a reminder that common sense and human decency should always trump rigid adherence to rules. I never built another igloo. I never needed to. The point had been made, the battles had been won, and life had moved on. But every winter when the snow fell heavy on my yard in Aurora, Colorado, I would smile and remember the time I built an igloo and accidentally took down an entire HOA's nonprofit status in the process. It remained the most unintentionally consequential thing I had ever done, and probably would remain so for the rest of my life. And I was completely okay with that. The following winter proved calmer than the previous two. Meadowbrook Heights had settled into a comfortable rhythm under Gary's continued leadership as HOA president. The new bylaws were working well, enforcement was reasonable and fair, and residents actually trusted their HOA board again. I built another snowman that year, this time with Wendy's help. We gave it sunglasses and a Hawaiian shirt, turning it into a beach snowman that made the neighborhood kids laugh. Nobody complained. Nobody called it an unauthorized structure. It was just a fun winter activity that brought smiles to people's faces. That's how it should have been from the start, I often thought. In March, I got word that Patricia had completed her community service and probation. She had moved out of Meadowbrook Heights, selling her house at a loss just to get away from the memories. I heard she was living in a small apartment in Denver and working her way back up in a new job. Part of me hoped she had truly learned from the experience and would eventually find peace. The IRS case had officially closed with the HOA's nonprofit status remaining revoked. Gary and the new board had decided not to reapply, determining that operating as a regular corporation with transparent accounting and democratic oversight actually worked better for their purposes. Dues increased slightly to cover the additional tax burden, but residents generally felt it was worth it for the improved governance. Walter closed his file on my case in April, sending me a final bill that was significantly lower than I expected. When I asked him about it, he said that the publicity from the case had brought his firm dozens of new clients dealing with HOA disputes, so he considered the reduced fee a thank you for the business. Plus, he added, I genuinely enjoyed working with you, Lucas. It's not often I get to fight for something so pure. Usually, HOA disputes involve complicated property issues or legitimate disagreements about modifications. Your case was simple. Build an igloo, get harassed by power-hungry HOA president, expose corruption, reform system. It was satisfying from start to finish. By summer, Wendy had officially moved in. We hosted a housewarming party and invited the whole neighborhood. Nearly 50 people showed up, filling my house and yard with conversation and laughter. Mrs. Foster brought her famous potato salad. Gary gave a short toast thanking me again for helping improve the community. Even Frank, who had initially sided with Patricia, came up to apologize for not seeing through her tactics sooner. It felt good to be part of something positive, to be known in my neighborhood not as the guy who fought the HOA, but as the guy who helped make things better. As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, I found myself standing in my front yard with Wendy, looking at the spot where my igloo had stood 18 months earlier. Nothing marked the location now. The grass had grown in, and you would never know that particular patch of lawn had been ground zero for such drama. "What are you thinking about?" Wendy asked, slipping her hand into mine. "Just that it's funny how life works sometimes." I built that igloo because my ex said I was boring and I wanted to prove her wrong. I never imagined it would lead to all of this. To meeting you, to actually making a difference in my community, to any of it. You think you would have done things differently if you had known, honestly. I probably would have been too scared to fight back if I had known how big it would get. Sometimes ignorance and stubbornness are the perfect combination for accidentally doing the right thing. Wendy laughed. Well, I for one am glad you built that igloo. Otherwise, we might never have met. Best decision I ever made, I agreed, kissing her forehead. The story of the Meadowbrook Heights igloo incident gradually faded from public attention, as viral stories always do. New controversies emerged, other HOA disputes made headlines, and life moved on. But within our community, the changes remained permanent. The reformed HOA became a model that other neighborhoods studied. Gary was invited to speak at HOA management conferences about implementing transparency and accountability measures. Several articles were written in property management journals about our case and the lessons learned. I occasionally got emails from people in other states dealing with their own unreasonable HOAs, asking for advice. I always told them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, but always try to be reasonable even when your HOA isn't. Sometimes you win by fighting, but sometimes you win by simply being the adult in the room. 2 years after the Igloo incident, Wendy and I got married. We had the ceremony in our backyard in May, with the whole neighborhood invited. Gary officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Mrs. Foster cried happy tears. Even Patricia sent a card with a brief note wishing us well and apologizing again for her past behavior. I appreciated the gesture. During the reception, one of Wendy's cousins who didn't know the whole story asked how we met. Before I could answer, one of my neighbors jumped in with, "Well, it all started when Lucas built an igloo and accidentally destroyed the HOA." Everyone laughed, and I found myself telling the story once again to an entertained audience. It never got old, partly because people found it so absurd that it had to be true. An igloo, all of that chaos over an igloo. The thing is, I said as I finished the story, I learned that the size of something doesn't determine its importance. That igloo was tiny and temporary, but the principles it represented were huge. The right to reasonable enjoyment of your own property, the importance of proportional enforcement, the need for accountability in organizations that have power over people's homes and lives. Those things matter, whether you're fighting over an igloo or something bigger. Wendy squeezed my hand. And that's why I love him. He stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult. As our first wedding anniversary approached, Colorado was hit with another major snowstorm. This time, I didn't even consider building an igloo. But I did build a snow fort with the neighborhood kids, and we had a massive snowball fight that involved about 20 children and a dozen adults. It was chaotic and fun and absolutely freezing, and nobody complained because it was just people enjoying winter together. That evening, warming up with hot chocolate by the fireplace, Wendy looked at me thoughtfully. "You think Patricia ever found peace?" she asked. "I hope so," I said honestly. What she did was wrong, but the punishment she received was severe. Losing everything over an igloo had to teach her something. Maybe she's a better person now. Maybe she learned that power without wisdom is dangerous, or maybe she's still bitter and angry. I'll probably never know, and that's okay. My part in her story is over. You ever worry that you'll end up in another situation like that? Some other bizarre conflict that spirals out of control, I laughed. With my luck, probably. But if I do, I'll handle it the same way. Stand my ground when I'm right. Stay reasonable even when others aren't, and don't be afraid to fight back against unreasonable authority. Those principles served me well before. They'll serve me well again if needed. 3 years after the Igloo incident, the HOA held a ceremony to dedicate a new community park they had built with carefully managed funds. They named it Meadowbrook Commons and installed a plaque that read, "Dedicated to transparent governance and community cooperation." May we always remember that rules serve people, not the other way around. Gary gave a speech at the dedication, and although he never mentioned the Igloo directly, everyone knew what had inspired the park and the message on that plaque. Change had come to Meadowbrook Heights because someone had built a snow dome and refused to back down when authority overreached. It was an absurd origin story, but it was ours. I stood there with Wendy watching families enjoy the new park and felt a sense of completion. The Igloo was long gone, melted into nothing years ago. Patricia was rebuilding her life elsewhere. The HOA had been reformed and was operating better than ever. And I had found love, community, and purpose through it all. Sometimes I still thought about that Wednesday morning when I looked out at the snow and made a spontaneous decision that changed everything. If my ex could see me now, she wouldn't call me boring. I had stood up to corruption, fought legal battles, made news headlines, and helped reform an entire organization. All because I built an Igloo. Life has a funny way of teaching you lessons through unexpected means. Mine came through snow and stubbornness, through legal battles over frozen water, through the simple act of refusing to let someone tell me I couldn't build something harmless and temporary on my own property. The Igloo was temporary. The lessons were permanent, and that made all the difference. As we walked home from the park dedication, I thought about all the ways that one decision had rippled through my life and my community. Better HOA governance, new friendships, meeting Wendy, helping other people stand up to unreasonable authority. It was more impact than I had ever imagined possible from a simple winter construction project. "What are you smiling about?" Wendy asked. "Just thinking about igloos," I said. She laughed, understanding immediately. We walked home together, hand in hand, through the neighborhood that had been transformed by snow, stubbornness, and the simple belief that reasonable people should be free to build igloos if they want to. And somewhere in Colorado, under whatever sky Patricia Henderson now called home, I hoped she had learned the same lesson, that power without wisdom leads to destruction, that rules without reason breed resentment, and that sometimes the smallest things can teach us the biggest lessons. My Igloo was gone, but its legacy remained, built into the foundation of a community that had learned to value common sense over rigid enforcement, transparency over secrecy, and human dignity over arbitrary authority. It was, in the end, the most important structure I had ever built. Even if it was made of snow,